Red Bull just signed former Liverpool boss Jurgen Klopp as their new head of global football, and is scheduled to begin on the 1st of January 2025. This is just the latest step the Red Bull company has taken towards dominating the sport, an effort that started many years ago. Through the years, Red Bull has become a household name in sports, and being an energy drink, it was no surprise when they started to get affiliated with extreme sports, owning 2 Formula 1 teams, one based in England and the other in Italy. But in the mid-2000s, they began to invest in football, and they've not looked back since. They quickly spread their tentacles across countries and continents, and started to gain a stronghold in the biggest sport in the world. How have they managed to do all of this in 2 decades? Red Bull's first foray into football came in 2005, when they bought their first football club. This was a brand that officially launched just 18 years prior. But they had their eyes set on world domination, so they made huge strides in a short time. As the saying goes, charity begins at home, so it was no surprise that Red Bull, being an Austrian brand, started their footballing journey in Austria. They bought a football club named SV Austria Salzburg and put the club through a complete transformation. At the time, the club's owners were having some money problems, so Red Bull stepped in and took ownership of the club, and their major aim was to develop a club that would become UEFA Champions League regulars. They changed the name of the club to FC Red Bull Salzburg, changed the club colours from violet to red and white, and then began to invest in players and facilities. Although they didn't achieve their aim of playing in the UEFA Champions League until the 2019-20 season, RB Salzburg enjoyed a lot of success under the new ownership. In the first season after the takeover, the club finished second in the Austrian Bundesliga table, and the following season, they won the league title for the first time in a decade. Just 2 years in, they'd already started tasting success. They finished as runners-up again in the 2007-2008 season, and then won the title again in the 2008-2009 season. Seeing how much success the first football project started to enjoy in such a short time, Red Bull decided to spread their arms across continents. In 2006, they bought a football club in the US, and then in 2007, they founded their first football club in Brazil. 2 years later, they repeated that formula, this time in Europe. Founding a club in Europe was always going to be a daunting task, more difficult than anywhere else. Football is at its finest and most competitive in Europe. So, as expected, it was going to be difficult to make it to the top and quickly start to enjoy success. But they were determined and confident. They chose Germany, and they started to do their homework there. For years, they looked where to invest in the country. They explored cities like Hamburg, Munich, and Dusseldorf. But after experiencing difficulties, they took the advice of former German World Cup and Ballon d'Or winner Franz Beckenbauer and settled in Leipzig. There wasn't a professional football club in the area at the time, so there was a huge opportunity. Red Bull drew up a plan to immediately invest 50 million euros into this club, and they went ahead to found it in May 2009 by buying the playing rights of SSV Markranstädt and undergoing the required DFB licensing procedure. They named the club Red Bull Leipzig, but they started to encounter some problems right from the very beginning. They were not allowed to use their logo, and were not allowed to use the name Red Bull either. So they opted for another logo and changed the name to Rasenballsport Leipzig, which meant lawn ball sport. The name didn't make much sense, to be honest, but you see, Red Bull is big on branding, so what mattered to them was creating a recognizable brand. They just wanted to retain the letters RB in the name, and Rasenballsport allowed them to do just that. Now, everybody just knows them as RB Leipzig, and in fact, some people assume RB stands for Red Bull. Anyway, this made RB Leipzig the only club under the Red Bull umbrella that does not carry the corporate name. Leipzig started in the 5th tier of German football, and the vision was for the club to be playing in the Bundesliga in 8 years, using the same model they'd adopted in Austria and the US. Did they manage to achieve it? You'll find out soon. But if you're enjoying the video so far, give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel to show your support. Now, Red Bull knew that achieving their goal would cost a lot of money, so they were reportedly ready to spend 100 million euros in the first 10 years of the club's existence. And, well, they started brilliantly. In their very first season, they finished first and gained promotion to the 4th tier. At the end of the 2009-10 season, the club changed strategy. The head coach, assistant coach, and sporting director were all sacked, and about 10 players were released. These decisions were made because Red Bull was now looking to make RB Leipzig the face of the footballing project in place of RB Salzburg. But life in Germany wasn't smooth sailing for the company. They were met with a lot of backlash from fans of German football. You see, in 2006, they planned to take over FC Sachsen Leipzig and name it FC Red Bull Sachsen Leipzig, but fans heavily protested Red Bull's involvement. The protests were persistent and even became violent, forcing Red Bull to abandon the plans altogether. They then turned their attention to FC St. Pauli. But once the club found out that Red Bull were trying to be more than just a sponsor, the management did not even consider it. Their fans had protested Red Bull's takeover of SV Austria Salzburg, so this could not even be a discussion. In 2007, they tried to invest in Fortuna Düsseldorf, and once it became public that Red Bull wanted to acquire more than 50% ownership and rename the club Red Bull Düsseldorf, fans protested wildly, and once again, Red Bull were forced to abandon their plans. It was all these roadblocks in these different cities that forced Red Bull to settle for Leipzig. At the time, no team from the city had played in the Bundesliga since 1994, so there weren't many protests. But the club had a strong football culture and fan potential, so it was ideal. Anyway, RB Leipzig continued to make steady progress. Their first trophy came in 2011 in the form of the Saxony Cup, just 2 years after they were founded. But the growth wasn't linear. They often tried and failed, but they never stopped trying. They sacked coaches, released players, and fired sporting directors until they found the winning formula. In 2012, they hired Ralf Rangnick as sporting director, and he was able to make decisions that quickly propelled the club to more success. In many ways, you could say he changed the life of the club and was a huge blessing to the Red Bull project. In his first season, they won the Saxony Cup again and gained promotion to the third tier of German football after 3 seasons in the fourth tier. During Rangnick's tenure, the fan base continued to expand, breaking records for stadium attendance game after game. In 2014, RB Leipzig achieved promotion to the second tier after winning a game in front of a packed RB Arena. With that, they became the first team to gain promotion to the second tier of German football after only 1 year in the third division. That summer, they spent €12 million on new players, which meant that despite being in the second division, they spent more than half the clubs in the first division. The following season, that number increased to €18.6 million. They just didn't stop investing. They tried to hire Thomas Tuchel as coach in 2015, but negotiations fell through, so Rangnick took up the coaching job, and he ended up leading the team to the Bundesliga for the first time ever in 2016. They had achieved their dream. Remember, when the club was founded in 2009, the goal was to gain promotion to the Bundesliga in 8 years. They did it in 7. The project was a huge success. Now, during this period, a pattern had developed where RB Salzburg seemed to always sell their best players to RB Leipzig, and the Salzburg fans were not happy about that. All this led to Salzburg fans singing chants against Leipzig when they met in a cup game in 2015. Anyway, after leading them to the Bundesliga, Rangnick stepped down to focus on his job as sporting director, and Ralf Hasenhüttl was hired as coach. RB Leipzig started their very first Bundesliga campaign in stellar fashion, going their first 13 games without a loss, thereby breaking the record for longest unbeaten streak by a newly promoted club. In their very first season in the German top flight, Leipzig finished second behind Bayern Munich and ultimately qualified for the Champions League at their first attempt. They finished third in their Champions League group and dropped to the Europa League, eventually reaching the quarterfinals of the competition. The club was growing at a tremendous rate. They reached the semi-finals of the Champions League in the 2019-20 season and the semi-finals of the Europa League in the 2021-22 season. They then won their first major trophy in 2022 after beating SC Freiburg on penalties in the DFB Pokal final. And they followed that up with the 2023 DFB Super Cup after they beat Bayern Munich 3-0 in the final, thanks to a Dani Olmo hat-trick. At this point, it was clear that the Red Bull footballing project was a huge success. But the question remains, how were they able to achieve it? Well, the simple truth is that they pumped a lot of money into the project. But more importantly, they knew where to put the money. They developed proper facilities and were able to invest in academies and scouting. Thanks to their scouting, they were able to get players like Erling Haaland, Sadio Mane, Timo Werner, Yusuf Poulsen, Benjamin Šeško, Marcel Sabitzer, Dominik Szoboszlai, Willi Orban, Emil Forsberg, and many more over the years. They took these players from football obscurity and turned them into world beaters and superstars. On top of that, they've had players like Joshua Kimmich, Luka Sucic, and Konrad Laimer come through their academy. They've also turned coaches into stars, from Ralf Rangnick to Ralf Hasenhüttl to the current Germany head coach Julian Nagelsmann. For an organization that only came into football 20 years ago, Red Bull has made significant progress in the sport across different countries. They've also been able to establish a distinct style of play that involves a relentless press and direct attack, which means, just like many traditional clubs, they have a footballing philosophy and identity. But despite achieving this much success in such a short time, the Red Bull company has not stopped looking for ways to continue to expand their horizon and strengthen their dominance of the sport. They've particularly done that by recruiting some of the best minds in the sport to work in executive roles. In 2019, Red Bull made Ralf Rangnick the head of sport and development, which meant that he oversaw the global footballing project. It was he who oversaw the takeover of Clube Atlético Bragantino in Brazil in 2019 and transformed them into Red Bull Bragantino. With Rangnick in charge, the Red Bull project grew exponentially. Apart from the growth of RB Leipzig and FC RB Salzburg, which has been discussed in detail, he was also able to develop the New York Red Bulls to the point where they became regular league contenders, even winning the MLS Supporters' Shield. The takeover of the New York Red Bulls was completed in 2006, and just like they did with the other clubs, they did a complete rebrand, changing the name, the colors, and logo. Under the new ownership, the club reached the final of the MLS Cup for the first time in 2008, won the Supporters' Shield for the first time in 2013, and went on to win it 2 more times in 2015 and 2018. They also developed an academy, which was the first cost-free program in the MLS, and they've gone on to produce a global superstar in Tyler Adams, who captained the US MNT at the 2022 World Cup. And in addition to making their own stars, the New York Red Bulls have been able to pull in some global superstars like Thierry Henry, Tim Cahill, Juninho, and Emil Forsberg over the years. Elsewhere, RB Bragantino gained promotion to the first tier of Brazilian football during Ralf Rangnick's tenure. Rangnick was also able to help the market value of the Red Bull clubs experience a 10-fold increase, from 120 million euros to 1.2 billion euros. RB Leipzig was the club that experienced Rangnick's influence more directly, and their value peaked at 270 million euros in 2019, establishing them as the biggest club in the Red Bull empire. Now, to continue their dominance, they've only gone and recruited another brilliant mind in Jurgen Klopp, so expect them to make even more brilliant strides in the coming years. It is important to note, however, that Red Bull is not the most welcome brand among football fans, especially in Germany. From the moment they've stepped foot in Germany, fans have protested what they term to be too much corporate interference in football. They've been accused of jeopardizing the essence of the game and footballing tradition by prioritizing money over the love of the game. This is why Jurgen Klopp received a lot of backlash from his former club Mainz after he accepted the job at Red Bull. But what are your thoughts on this? Is the Red Bull empire the future of football, or is it taking away the soul of the game? Tell us what you think in the comments. Also, with Klopp now playing a major role, what do you think is next for Red Bull? Will they continue to spread themselves by taking over ownership of more clubs? Will they maybe go to the Premier League to try and dominate there as well? What do you think? Get in the comments and share your thoughts. Speaking of Klopp, have you noticed what his replacement's been doing? Crazy, right? If you want to know how Arne Slot has revived Liverpool after Klopp, click this video and we'll tell you the full story.